What is up, and welcome back. This is episode number 16 of the Hire and Fire podcast, brought to you by Pyra Consulting. Today we're talking about sales and recruiters and the difference and connection of the two. So if you're not in the industry as a candidate or a hiring manager, this might be interesting because of how it impacts you. If you are in the industry, then you're going to love the shenanigans that we're talking about because it's something very unique to our industry. So enjoy the show, and we'll see you next week. Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to the Hire and Fire podcast. This is your host, Jeremy Miller from Pyra Consulting. I am the founder and CEO, and we are joined again by Chad Sandy, your friendly neighborhood account manager. Say hello, Chad.
Howdy.
Howdy doody. This is episode number 16. We are talking about account managers and recruiters today. This is a very interesting, kind of unique dynamic in regards to our industry about how inextricably linked the two jobs are. So whether you're a job seeker, a hiring manager, whether you're in our industry or not, it's kind of interesting information about how we interface with each other, why you as a job seeker might speak to a few different people within the same staffing company. What are the differences? What are the similarities? How do we interface with each other? All kinds of stuff. So that's the topic for today. So you, sir, have been both, correct?
I have.
And which one's better?
Ooh, I don't know if I want to. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, don't answer that one.
Yeah. I enjoy sales.
Okay. Why so?
It feels like less of a grind. And I think if there are recruiters listening, if there are recruiters listening right now, they're nodding their heads yes. And if there are salespeople who have done both, they're nodding their heads yes, as long as no one else in the room, like other recruiters, are looking. So I'm not saying it's easier. It's not easy.
No.
Both are hard.
Both are challenging.
But we try to avoid this roller coaster, but when you're on this roller coaster of I'm prospecting, or I have a lot of recs and I'm managing my recs and the interviews and the activity of the recs, right? We've talked about this. In those moments where you have a lot of recs and there's a lot of activity.
Job requisition orders for non-industry people
Yes.
out there is what he's referencing. Continue.
Even if the prospecting and finding new requirements, new job orders is slow, it doesn't feel as frustrating because you have this activity here. So essentially, you might go several days without like a lot of new sales movement, but you're still getting stuff done. Where in recruiting, it's just kind of, maybe the highs and lows aren't quite as high or as low, but there's this just constant, steady grind.
And never ending.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know recruiters will relate to this. If you are assigned a requirement and you have found 3 good candidates for that requirement and you submit them over, but some time goes by, whatever it is, a day, 2 days, 3 days, your job of recruiting on that role never really ends until it's either filled or gone or whatever, even though you have found people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And so, whereas to the salesperson in the same scenario, there's 3 recs. He or she has recs and other recs, and sometimes you can be having low periods of activity, but things are still cruising along. Roles are getting filled for what's already on the board, even if you're not filling the pipeline. So it doesn't feel like as much of a constant, everyday 8 to 5 grind that just never ends. There's always a requirement to work on.
The weirdest part about this dynamic is how it changes our industry. Because we are commission-based people for the most part. There's a few companies out there that are just salaried people, but we are paid to fill these roles. So salespeople and recruiters, both. And we are inextricably linked because both sides of the equation are required. We have to have salespeople out there calling on our customers, landing agreements to do business between corporations, and then in addition, managing relationships with hiring managers and executives and helping drive that process. After you have landed that job opening with your client, you have to bring it back into your local office and now sell, quote unquote, that job to the recruiters. Then it turns into their job to go find candidates. They might know people now, or they might have to go find them, or both, right?
Yep.
So sales, in a lot of ways, is completely worthless without recruiters finding candidates. But recruiters are completely worthless as well if sales doesn't find openings. So we absolutely need each other, and it's very unique. So my first experience in sales, I sold copiers. So I'm selling a product, and I'm working with other salespeople, and we have separate territories. So we're competitive in the sense that we want to perform, but what John, Chris, or Susie are doing next to me internally at the office is kind of irrelevant to me because I got my own thing to worry about. In our industry, it's not that way. So there's a lot of, we'll put it this way, sometimes if you don't do it right, the relationships between sales and recruiters can get combative because the salespeople have killed themselves to get this business and they're not getting candidates from recruiters. Or recruiters have killed themselves to be able to find the right people and they want to help these people that they're meeting with and talking to, but they either don't have the right job order or the job order's not moving anywhere, or we submitted you this guy 5 days ago and we haven't heard back from the client. Mm-hmm. So it's a weird dynamic internally, one that I completely underestimated when I first joined the industry. Now, obviously, I know it all too well, and I understand both sides, so I have a lot of sympathy for both groups.
Right.
But in all reality, if you've only ever recruited, you don't know the blood, sweat, and tears that it takes, maybe months or years, to just get an opportunity to work with a customer. And then if you've only ever sold, then you as a salesperson, not on purpose, but maybe by default, have a little less empathy towards recruiters because you don't know how hard they are working every day, all day, to find people that would be interested and help them through the process. And that's where if there was communication breakdown or challenges internally to a staffing company, it literally has to do with that dynamic.
Yeah. I liken it to the sheepdog and the coyote cartoon from the 60s, 70s, 80s, where they walk into work together, punch the clock on the tree, beat the shit out of each other for 8 hours, but then the whistle blows, usually with the coyote right about to pop the sheep, or the sheepdog about to pop the coyote. And then the whistle blows and they stop and they grab their lunch pails and go home.
And they walk out laughing.
As friends.
Yeah.
I'd also say it can go either way, but I use the bus analogy that sales is the bus, but recruiting is the engine, or vice versa. It doesn't matter. They're both one can't work without the other.
Yeah.
However you want to look at it, well, recruiting drives the bus and then sales is the engine. It doesn't matter. They can't work without one another. And yeah, I think you hit on something where if you're in sales and you've never recruited, you probably really can't relate to just that steady grind of a recruiter. And if you're a recruiter that's never sold, it's probably a challenge to relate to just how difficult it is to land a job order.
Yeah. Yeah. And so another interesting component is not only are they two different jobs, but they're two completely different mentalities. And that's why I'm a firm believer, and I think any salesperson or recruiter out there in our industry will completely agree with this. If you've spent a year or more in this industry and somebody asks you the question that I did at the beginning, what do you like better? You just know. Like it's in your soul. It's like imprinted on your heart. That you either have more passion and interest in helping our customers fill their job orders and working with the hiring managers and looking at things from a departmental or a client-based perspective, Or you just have tons of passion for helping individual job seekers, whether they're $150,000 blank or they're brand new entry level blank. It doesn't even matter.
Yeah. So I always felt, again, just being honest, this is just me, is that I always felt the actual job of doing as a recruiter, the job you do is easier. But closing business is every bit as difficult and frustrating. But I'm talking about, if we're going to compare, if the apple to apple we're going to compare is in sales, the job is developing a relationship and getting a job order. That's the basic job. Filling it's a whole nother story. Developing a relationship, getting a job order. On the recruiting side, developing a relationship, getting a candidate in your pipeline. The recruiter job, much easier. Now, in other words, I always thought it was much easier to build networks of people that fit certain skills and just stay in touch with them every quarter and then have my network. Easy. But getting the two to mesh, that's where the whole thing gets difficult.
Yeah.
Where I found as a salesperson, the actual job of building those relationships and getting job orders is much harder.
Yeah, and in my experience, another twist of how to say the same thing but very different dynamic is at the beginning of your career, whether it be you just started in this industry or you just started with a new company, even if you have experience, the beginning as a salesperson is much more difficult because it's not just as simple as picking up the phone in connecting with a hiring manager. You have to worry about whether or not your organization has a signed service agreement with the client. You have to develop relationships across multiple different departments. So even if you know somebody well in one area, you have to figure out a way to know everybody else because that's your job to canvas that client. And it sucks. I mean, at the beginning, if you want to fill a rec, it is guaranteed going to take longer to do that brand new as a salesperson compared to being a recruiter. And the reason why is that if you come into a company, again, fresh in the industry or experience, there are already job orders on the board at the organization that you work with. It might be one or it might be 100, but there's already one there. And in theory, you could get the right person on the phone in one day and have somebody in play because all of the legwork to get the job order was already done. We just needed to find a candidate. So I think, again, sales at the beginning is harder. The flip is also true. I think recruiting deep in a tenured role is more difficult than a tenured salesperson. Because once you're tenured and you have your customer base and you already have the agreements and you already know everybody and you already have consultants out there working, it is much, much easier because you could potentially get a few job orders at a time from the same manager, or you've already gotten an agreement with that customer so you know Jim Bob manager in one area so you can call Susie in the other area and work with her immediately because that legwork's done. So it's not easy, it's just easier. When you're a recruiter that's very tenured, it never stops. You have to be able to find people at all times. And even if you know a ton of people, every individual job seeker situation is changing constantly. Whether they just took a job and you might know them well, but they're good. So you're constantly having to find new talent all the time, even if you know 1,500 people in the market, and it just never ends. So both of them are challenging. I just think it depends. What is more challenging to you is kind of based on your tenure in your organization and or how much kind of placements or profitability or spread or whatever you want to call it that you've built up. But it's a commission sales job. It's not for everybody. That's for darn sure.
And I think both, if you have bad habits in both, the both jobs become this lifelong grind if you don't develop good habits. And what I'm saying there is, on the sales side, to speak to your point, if you work very hard for long enough, I mean, let's think about it. For most of us, you only need, a dozen or dozen and a half, whatever, a dozen, 2 dozen really great relationships with managers. And your job will become pretty easy. right?
Yeah, because you only have a dozen or two dozen to manage.
These are people that you've built enough of a relationship with that when you call, they answer. They meet with you once in a while. You always have a good idea of what their project load looks like and what the future looks like and what the current state looks like. When they have needs, they're calling you and they're letting you know ahead of time. Mm-hmm. So you just gotta. It only takes maybe a dozen of those for most of us that are working at typical size staffing firms. On the recruiting side, the bad habits that one would have where your job never gets easier is by nature when you start out you don't have a network.
You don't know anybody.
So therefore all the recruiting you're doing is reactive because you're just starting.
And every phone call is a person that you've never spoken to before.
Correct. Mm-hmm. But if you never advance past that stage, your job will never get easier. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the biggest mistakes I see recruiters making, including myself in the past when I was one, is that at a certain point you need to identify the company that you're working for. Where are the 80% of the job orders, where do they fall?
What clients, what skill sets?
Yes.
Sure.
So, and once you've identified where 80% of the requirements are, .NET developer, Java developer, project, whatever they are, mm-hmm. then your job becomes easier if you just decide I'm going to build pipelines or networks of, a couple dozen people in each
category. Sure.
So now you might only have 150 people that you stay in touch with once a month with a text, an email, a phone call, knowing that most of the time, most of them are not available or coming available. But, 30 here, 30 here, 30 here, 30 here. That might only be 5 or 6 reach outs a day just to stay in touch with your 150.
With the people that you know.
Yeah, with your and now over time, if you've matched it up with the company's job orders, now at a certain point down the road, when the sales gal walks in the door and says, "Hey, client X needs a senior Java developer," you're like, "Yep, of the 30 Java developers in my network, 4 are coming available next month, and 2 of them are actually a fit." Bang, quick submittal, speed to market. That's when I think the recruiting job can get easier.
Mm-hmm.
But if you never advance beyond that reactive recruiting mode, that's when it's just a grind. And that's why I think a lot of people jump.
Well, and if you're a job seeker or have ever been and you're getting calls from recruiters and they're driving you crazy because the only thing they're doing is giving a crap about whether or not you're a good fit for the job they're working on, that's the stuff that drives you crazy. That's why you could be a Java developer and be getting a call from a recruiter in Seattle, Washington, asking whether or not you'd be interested in working for State Farm as an insurance agent. Yep. Right? Because there are recruiters out there that the only thing they can see is the requirement that they're working on and not understanding that every single person they're talking to is an individual with specific desires and specific goals and specific skills, and your job is to know what they want. Now, maybe they can help you fill a requirement, and that's what you want, but the best way you can get what you want is by helping them get what they want.
Yeah.
The downside, the dynamic of what you're talking about with 24 relationships versus 300 relationships is that as a salesperson, it's a heck of a lot more volatile. Those are 24 people that you're working with, whether you get along with them well or not, and whether or not they like you, and whether or not you guys are buddy-buddy is almost irrelevant. Your job is to keep in touch with those people. Mm-hmm. As a recruiter, if you're working with 300 people, that's great that you have a relationship with them, but there might be 500,000 people in the market that you're in that are in IT. So if somebody goes dark on you or somebody treats you poorly or finishes a project terribly, in theory, there's always other people you can call. But as a salesperson, you're being tasked with keeping up with these customers, and you have to keep going back to that well, and that can be a little bit more challenging. Now, I would agree. It depends on what your strengths are as a recruiter. It's obviously a great strength to be able to handle a big network of people and have a good follow-up process, what in the industry we would typically call a tickle system, about when to keep in touch with people. And that could be overwhelming. and very challenging, but nonetheless, it's just about executing on that on a daily basis. So,
And if I was going to look at it from the job seeker perspective, God, I'm getting emails and I'm getting calls all the time from recruiters. So I just ignore them unless I'm looking. Would you say that's probably common, right?
I would assume.
Yep.
Yeah, and I've done it too.
My advice to job seekers would be start paying a little more attention to the recruiters that regularly ping you.
Consistency.
And maybe put them to the top of the list. Yeah, I noticed Ashley calls me every 90 days just to ask how I'm doing or whatever. Okay, that's someone that's should stand out to a job seeker. They consistently ping me once a month or once a quarter. And then also beyond that, so now you have your favorite recruiters. Dig in and ask them about the relationships and try to get some honesty in terms of where their best clients are. So for example, I don't know, Target. If I was a job seeker and I wanted to get a job at Target, I would want to be working with a recruiter where they place a lot of people at Target, right? Not just we're on the list, right? Or a Wells Fargo. We have, a company that has a few hundred people at Wells Fargo versus a company that has 8. Might be, that might be a staffing firm you want to work with because it would imply most likely that they have better relationships or at least more better relationships.
Yeah. And then if you're a job seeker and you're normally working with a recruiter, but there will be or could be occasions where you start interfacing with the account manager. Those normally are only going to happen once we and you, the job seeker, once we and you have identified that there's some mutual interest here. Mm-hmm. You're a good fit for a job that we have, and you're interested. And we've validated both of those. Now we're in the process of the screening phase where you might end up speaking with the account manager. And more often than not, if you were to speak to both the recruiter and the account manager about the role you're being considered for, your first assumption or perception would be that the salesperson knows more about this job than the recruiter does. And you might be tempted to want to start interfacing with the salesperson moving forward because they are deemed more knowledgeable than the recruiter is. Try not to fall into that trap because the recruiter is paid to manage the relationship and the process of getting you through this, while the sales manager or the account manager or whatever is being paid to manage the relationship on the client side. So where they might know more about how to prepare you for an interview, they may not be in the best position to be as understanding, as flexible, as long-term motivated about your career, your desires, where you're coming from, what you want next. The only reason they got involved is because they're trying to get you an interview with their client.
With this one
particular thing. So, always, even if you're talking with an account manager, continue to keep communication with the recruiter because that's the person who's paid and responsible to help you through the whole process, regardless of whether or not this job works. Because even if this job does work and you interview and get it, you're going to be working with that recruiter throughout the remainder of the project, not necessarily the salesperson. So yeah, in a moment, in a flash in the pan, they might seem to provide more value to you, but long-term, the recruiter is the person that you want to be connected with, hands down. Yeah. Another challenge too is a lot of times in our industry, whether people out there know it or not, some of the bigger shops in town and across the country, they hire very, very entry-level recruiters. So that dynamic can be even more strong, where you perceive that this recruiter is a little lacking in knowledge about what you do, how you do it, technologies, projects, grand scheme of a corporation and how IT works inside of their four walls. But they are still the right person to talk to because they're doing the best and we all started somewhere. Mm-hmm. So hopefully, as long as they're not completely dropping the ball, give the recruiter a shot.
So because sales and recruiting are inextricably linked.
Yes.
What's your thoughts on managing conflict?
Between the two.
Yeah.
Communication. So here internally, I run different sales meetings and different recruiter meetings on purpose. Because again, these are two different jobs. So if I were to have everybody in the office or in the conference room trying to hash this out, you just have people coming from a different vantage point. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is almost as similar to like men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Like it is a completely different mentality. Yep. So you as a recruiter are trying to help these people and place them anywhere you can. So if you're a job seeker out there and you're working with a recruiter and it's a good one, and they got you two different requirements to review, chances are there's two different account managers associated with each one of those roles. So they are now competing for you as a candidate. And sometimes there can be conflict there. But to answer the simple part of your question, I try and hear out each group individually and understand where they're coming from, and then try and articulate that to the other group in a separate discussion. On occasion, we will have these discussions as a group in general, and I just continue to I get it. I've been doing this for 14 years. I get it. Like, I understand. Different account managers have different tendencies. So you as a recruiter, working with an account manager, you might have an account manager that's really, really easy to work with, and they get your candidates in play consistently. And you might have an account manager that's a little bit more annoying to deal with, and they're constantly asking you for more information, and that can be frustrating. But they're just different people doing the same job. And then going back to our original point, a lot of times the breakdown is just a lack of empathy, distinguished between sympathy. Empathy would be that you can truly understand the other person, and sympathy is that you could try and resonate, or at least try and understand. Normally, it's tough for each one of the sides to truly empathize with the other, and then they're prone to judge, and that's where the shit talking starts, frankly.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that even answer your question?
Yeah. Okay. I think open communication. I think sometimes the company's comp plan or how they treat each side matters. There are companies out there that clearly treat sales as better than recruiting.
100%.
Pay them more. The commission is more.
It's perceived as a higher job.
Yeah. And, and if everyone in the room knows that the salespeople are getting paid higher bases, they're getting paid better commission, that creates a hierarchy, subconsciously.
Yes. Where recruiters can feel talked down to.
Yeah.
Or recruiters can be intimidated by the account management group.
Yeah.
Or the salespeople can fall prey to viewing them as a lower level job.
And my personal opinion is, I would say most of the conflict would, if I was to peel away layers, get to the core, that's it. I think it would be a rarity, someone listening going, yeah, the recruiters at our company think they're my boss. That kind of thing.
That would be weird.
Yeah, I think it's generally the recruiters thinking the salespeople think they're the boss. And frankly, the salespeople thinking they are the boss. Yeah, you guys work for me. I'm finding the job orders. You're kind of working for me. And that if that is someone's mentality at the start line, then through the whole sales and recruiting process, there's going to be headbutting.
Yeah. Well, the weird thing about, I'll word it this way. I attacked that when I started this company because I knew the pitfalls of it. I understand some of the benefits of having a promote from within strategy, so recruiters moving into sales after they've kind of proved themselves. I think that overall hurts an organization's ability to deliver on what our customers need. Because basically what you're doing is you're allowing recruiters a sufficient amount of time to get good at their job, and then you pluck them out of their job and put them in sales, and then you backfill them with somebody who's never recruited before. So by default, you have a group of people that are always low in tenure and low in experience. Now the client loves it because everybody they're working with is super experienced and tenured and has some success under their belt. But unfortunately, that can lead to a lack of ability to deliver. And then almost every story you can name about candidates being frustrated with recruiters comes from recruiters being inexperienced. And the more inexperienced you are, the more you're just focused on finding a darn candidate for the rec that you're assigned to. Mm-hmm. And that's where candidates start to feel like a piece of meat, because the only thing they can feel in a meeting or over the phone is that this recruiter just wants me to say yes to this job.
Yep.
But they're sitting there going, well, sorry, dude. Like, I get it that I fit the job for you, but I don't want a 53-minute commute. Or, I'm sorry, I can't take a 17% pay cut.
Yeah.
Or, I don't want to work for that big or that small of a company or whatever it is.
They're constantly, the questions they're being asked by these junior recruiters are, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this?
Please fit my job. Please fit my job. Please fit my job.
So the recruiter's checking these boxes of keywords. Meanwhile, they're never asking the candidate, say, what is it you want?
What is it you want?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is probably a big source of frustration for job seekers.
Yeah. Now, in general, I want the jobs to be separate. So the expectation is that the salespeople will be working with our clients. And therefore, when they get an interview request or they need information on a bulked up resume, or we need to do references or a technical screen, or who cares, I would want the salespeople to ask the recruiters to do that. So I don't have a problem with the salespeople calling a candidate, but I would rather the recruiter do that. The recruiter knows you. The recruiter already met with you. The recruiter knows your personality, your preferences, your style. Mm-hmm. And if you have an account manager calling you out of the blue, they're judging you even if you don't know it. So if they're calling to confirm an interview with you and you're not flexible, or you have a problem with the job, they might immediately perceive you as a flight risk or a B-level candidate, where in all reality, you might be perfect. You just have specific concerns and you're only willing to leave your job if it accomplishes what you need to do.
Yep.
So that's why I want the recruiters to work with the candidates almost always. Mm-hmm. And then the same thing goes with the salespeople. I mean, long story short, you know these managers. Recruiters don't know them. We can tell coherent stories about our clients and about what our experiences have been placing people, and we're pretty good at that. But I don't know your manager, your hiring manager. I don't know everything you've learned about that person at lunch, golf, phone calls. I couldn't possibly know that.
Yeah.
So it's, in my opinion, it's very important to have them as two separate jobs. You as a job seeker or even hiring managers may not know that some companies out there do what's called full desk, where they are both. So they are selling to their clients, and then once they find a job order, it is their personal responsibility to go find a candidate. I understand the logic to do both. I just don't think you can effectively do both either at a high level or long term. And that's why we separate the two.
Do you think a lot of hiring managers, so let's kind of shift just temporarily to the perspective of the hiring manager.
Yeah.
Do you think a lot of hiring managers are aware of or are made aware of by the salesperson what the particular staffing firm's process is, recruiting process? I wonder what most hiring managers think goes on behind the scenes when they say, yeah, I need a Java developer.
I think it depends on the salesperson, but I guess my immediate answer would be, unless the salesperson is bringing up that information about the dynamic on their end, I would say no. Probably most hiring managers don't really know what the recruiters either need or want or are doing on the back end. So for example, if you're a hiring manager out there and you have a job order and you let your salesperson, even one that you know very well, know that you have an opening. Now this guy or gal is trying to track you down saying, I have follow-up questions. I need to know A, B, C, and D. But you're friggin' busy.
Yep.
And you're kind of annoyed by it. And then maybe you work with 2, 3, 4 staffing companies. So now you have 2, 3, 4 different account managers bugging you for more information. For the most part, they're doing that because we need that information internally in order to prioritize business and to be able to help the recruiters actually know what they're finding.
Right.
And that component, I think, is where most hiring managers would probably be ignorant. And by ignorant, I mean the true definition of the word, if they just don't know, not that they're not smart or something like that. That's my guess. What do you think?
I think most hiring managers probably are unaware of what the actual process is. And so then it becomes, I got these 3 or 4 staffing firms I use, they find me people. Or I just send it out to all 17 or 20 vendors and I get people.
And I just see what happens.
And I'm guessing that they would probably think, if what they're doing is phishing essentially, that they're thinking, if I send this out to my vendors, whether it's 3 or 20, it doesn't matter, what they're thinking is, who do you have now? Who do you have? I don't know if they oftentimes have a complete understanding of what actual recruiting means or what they're doing to find the people. And they're just hoping you have somebody, which is kind of maybe how it was 20 years ago when there were more consulting firms that carried bench.
Yes.
Right? Yes. I have 5 people on my bench. Here's what they do. And then you're marketing them versus finding job orders and finding people.
Yeah, and what most hiring managers don't know is, yes, we have what we would call a pipeline, which would be defined as people that we already know, that we've vetted or we've had a previous experience with, that are readily available. So if you get a candidate as a hiring manager in 2 hours, that person they already knew, right? So, but normally we're doing a combination of who do we know, and we have to go find new people. So I think there's probably a misconception on why it would take a good amount of time to find people, because to your point, we don't always have a perfect pipeline in every skill set, no matter how hard we try.
Yeah.
So sometimes we can come up with people the same afternoon, no problem. But there is a huge difference between what I call a temp agency and what I would define as a professional staffing company. Temp agencies do day labor. They are the ones who will send you an administrative assistant, a warehouse person, or whatever the skill set is, and you just need a body. Yeah. Send me in somebody that can do this. Have them start Monday, period. That's a temp agency. We don't do that. We're a professional staffing company. We are very deliberate to learn what you want as a customer and to learn what you want as a candidate, and then we match you accordingly. And we want to avoid wasting your time on both sides by giving you what you want. So as long as you can give us enough time to ask some questions about, what is it that you want, Mr. Hiring Manager? What is it that you want, Miss Candidate? If we know that, now we can play matchmaker. Mm-hmm. If you're working with a temp agency as a job seeker, then you know exactly what I mean. They're telling you to show up at the warehouse in Chaska
and they'll
on Monday.
And they'll tell you what to do when you get there.
And they'll just tell you what to do. You don't even have to interview half the time.
Yeah.
So it's a huge difference in philosophy. So if you have any type of skill set that needs to be marketed or screened out, aka 99% of all skill sets in IT, you need to be working with a IT professional staffing company. And same with a hiring manager. If you have skill sets that you need to interview for, that you need vetted for, that you have to validate certain amounts of experience or industry knowledge or technical ability or all three, then we need typically a certain amount of time, even with people we know, to be able to connect with them and validate, here's what we have open. Do you like it? Is this a fit? Do you have blank? I know you have A and B, but do you have C? Like, these things take a little while.
Right.
So that's where some of the annoyance can come from hiring managers on lack of speed. And that's where some of the annoyance on the job or the job seekers where I get it. We submitted your resume a couple of days ago. I understand you'd like an update. We just don't have one yet because the process is taking a little bit of time for them to find the right core group of candidates so that they can interview 3 people and we can give you a 33.3% chance of getting that job.
Yeah.
In that example.
So another area that I think the two, that sales and recruiting are inextricably linked, is what I just wrote down a term. I called it hot leads, but it goes both directions. Do you think that each side does a good job sharing information with the other?
Hell no.
And what I'm saying is, in sales, we're calling hiring managers all day long and networking, and sometimes we get information that so-and-so is looking for work, and that would be the prime opportunity to connect him, introduce him to one of your recruiters. And same on the recruiting side. They're talking to candidates all day long, finding out where they're interviewing at, getting all sorts of intel that it would seem would be natural then to share with your sales staff to generate more sales. So how do you think the industry does in general sharing that information? Are we making our jobs even more hard than they already are by not sharing intel that we're naturally getting every day, but because we're so bogged down and busy, we're missing things?
Yeah, so what you're alluding to is I'm a recruiter and I'm on the phone with a candidate who knows or is literally currently working in a department that we are either working with or would like to work with. So now this recruiter's on the phone with somebody who has vital information about team size, environment, project status, job layoffs, hiring, whatever. So does the recruiter go to the appropriate account manager and share that information? That's the question.
On that side,
and,
sure.
The answer is typically no.
Right. I mean, I hear all the time, I'll be sitting there and someone will say, oh, I just came across this candidate that used to work at the company that I'm now trying to fill a rec for. And I'll say, oh, find out who their manager was back when they worked there. You know, that. But everyone's so busy that often that information isn't gotten.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot of missed opportunities there.
It's a perpetual problem, but to push back on you, the reason why, and you can understand this, is because recruiters tend to view salespeople as that's your friggin' job.
Yeah.
That's your job to go get leads and to go land clients. I'm doing my job. I'm talking to the candidates. Mm-hmm. And then the salespeople are equally, potentially, just as guilty of saying that's your friggin' job. My job's to work with this customer, and it's not my job to manage a pool of candidates. So I don't think you could call that selfish. I think it's a little unfair.
Yeah.
I just think it's partially natural to the degree that that's not what you're paid to do. But if you're smart and you've been doing this for a while, you can understand the benefits of both sides. Because in theory, if you're a recruiter, if you can develop leads, quote unquote, for your salespeople, your company will have more jobs to work on. And that's how you get paid, by having requirements to submit your candidates to.
Sure.
And then, yeah, I get it. You're an account manager and your job is to find recs to bring back to the office. But if you just got word that your hiring manager had to lay off 2 of his best people, it probably behooves you to get that information to a recruiter, because 2 of the best people, quote unquote, from the hiring manager were just laid off. Not fired, laid off because they had no choice.
Yep.
For financial reasons.
Yep.
And now we have 2 people that are hitting the market that we could potentially help and fill another requirement elsewhere. And people just don't slow down. You just don't slow down.
Yeah.
It's a busy, busy, busy job.
Yeah, and sometimes that which is not required doesn't get done.
Dude, for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm also not of the opinion that I should be mandating my recruiters to come up with leads any more than I should be mandating salespeople to refer candidates. I just think if we have this discussion enough and I can encourage this enough, you can encourage good behavior. I'm just not looking to add more processes to throw at my people.
Yeah.
for better or for worse. And I'm sure there's staffing managers and other executives in the staffing business. If they were to hear that, they would laugh at me.
Yeah.
But I'm just not into building processes on top of processes.
Right. Well, then you end up getting people that just go through the motions to check the box.
Correct.
Oh, I got to make 47 more phone calls today.
Yeah. So the relationship between the two is normally pretty cohesive because we know we need each other. But it breaks down when you start judging the other end. Why in the hell didn't Christy get feedback on my candidate? Well, you don't really know whether or not Christy's doing what she's supposed to do or not. And why in the hell didn't Chris confirm my interview yet? Well, you don't know whether or not he called, texted, emailed, maybe even twice that candidate already, and that he's already doing what he needs to do. And that lack of knowledge and judgment is where all this crap comes from. And, you wouldn't know that unless you work or have worked inside of a staffing company.
Yeah.
And then in addition, we all have pressure. We need to find candidates. You need to find recs.
Yeah.
We're trying to do the best we can, but we need each other.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, in sports, they say winning cures all. And in our business, deals equal winning. So deals cure all.
Yeah.
It's funny how doing deals alleviates a lot of that conflict, for sure.
Well, it's always going to be a goofy topic. We could probably keep going on and on forever, but I think we covered the main highlights, don't you?
Yeah.
Did I miss anything?
I think you touched on the communication piece. That's key. I think if both sides, sales and recruiting, go into the deal knowing that they're linked. So if you establish it, you know it, you need each other, that should make resolving conflict easier.
Yeah.
I think you run into the biggest problems where if you have salespeople who think, I don't need you guys, I could find these dang people myself. Or recruiters going, I don't need you guys. We got these VMS systems that spit out recs all day long. What do we need salespeople for?
Yeah.
Now you're going to have problems.
Love it. Great segue too, because next week's episode we are diving into VMS systems.
Ooh.
That stands for Vendor Management Systems. If you're a job seeker, you're going to want to listen to this because this is the weirdest dynamic of our industry. If you have ever, as a job seeker, received the same job from 3 different staffing firms within a few hours of each other, I'm going to give you exactly the reason why and how to handle that situation next week. And then if you're a hiring manager, this is the weirdest dynamic imaginable about how we follow the rules, but we don't follow the rules, and what that means to you and what that means to us.
Yeah.
So we'll come back next week with a VMS related topic. And we appreciate you listening to the Hire and Fire podcast, episode number 16. Sales and Recruiters is in the books. We will see you next week. You just got done listening to Hire and Fire, a production by Pyra Consulting. Please check us out online on either LinkedIn, Facebook, or our website at pyraconsulting.com. That's PIRA consulting.com.